Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. I hope you're doing well with whatever's going on in your world right now. I am busy with moving and packing and sorting and storing. I'm probably going to say that every episode because that's the focus of a lot of my time right now. But I am looking forward to spending some time with friends that I haven't seen since before the pandemic. They have an almost 3-year-old, and we haven't seen her since she was, since before her first birthday. So she wasn't even walking the last time we saw them. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing them and spending time with them. And sometimes it's just those little things that put a smile on my face and give me something to look forward to. Something I definitely look forward to each week is talking to authors, and today is no exception. I am speaking with author Nicole Fanning today about the first 2 books in her Inferno of the Heart series. They are called Ignite and Catalyst. Catalyst is the first book. Let me go ahead and give you the description of Catalyst. This is, again, Heart of the Inferno series, book 1. When Natalie Tyler arrives in Chicago to attend her cousin's wedding, she is just hoping to survive the week with her estranged family and her ex-fiancé. 1 week. One uneventful week at the beautiful Hotel Jefferson is all she has to endure before she can return to her quiet life in Miami. However, fate has other plans. A split-second decision unknowingly puts her on the path of one of the city's wealthiest bachelors and one of the deadliest. She finds herself thrust into a world she does not understand, the world of Jackson Pace, billionaire, hotelier, mafia boss. In an expansive underworld of crime, violence, and deceit, Jackson is king. He is heartless, ruthless, and runs the city with an iron fist. The devilishly handsome Jackson is used to getting what he wants, no matter the cost. However, Natalie did not come to Chicago for love, and certainly not for an ungrateful, spoiled playboy with a god complex. But soon she begins to wonder if there is more to this mysterious man than meets the eye. Entangled in their fiery romance and a fleeting hope of happiness, Jackson sets his sights on the beautiful and charismatic Natalie Tyler. But his enemies have noticed Natalie too. Can Jackson win Natalie's heart before everything goes up in flames? Their passionate romance will take you on a heart-pounding wild ride of suspense, mystery, and chemistry, so explosive it could set the whole world on fire. That is the description from Amazon for Catalyst. Again, the author is Nicole Fanning, if you want to look into these. So this is romance. It is mafia romance, which is not a genre that I delve into very often, but it is really fun to, as I was talking to Nicole, to hear her talk about why she chose this genre and how she tried to make this genre her own, a little different from maybe your typical mafia romance. So she tries to walk a very specific line, and she's going to talk more about that. In fact, let's go ahead and turn to the interview with Nicole so she can talk more about this book, Catalyst, the second book in the series, which is also out, Ignite, and the other books that she has planned for this series. Again, the author is Nicole Fanning. The series is the Heart of the Inferno series. Let's turn now to that interview. Hi, Nicole. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Sarah. I'm so happy to be here.
I am excited to have you here. We're going to talk about, you have 2 books out. Before we get to the books, though, if you could share a little bit about yourself, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely. So I am a smitten wife and very passionate dog mom to my 3 rescue dogs. And I, enjoy board games and reading books, obviously, and writing. So Pretty simple, but yeah.
What kinds of dogs do you have?
I have a Chihuahua Pomeranian mix. His name is Loki. Sometimes I call him Satan. But I also have, we don't really know what he is. We want to say he's like a Dachshund Corgi, maybe Bloodhound mix because he is really long. Like if he had normal size legs, he would be a normal size dog. But he's got like half the legs of a normal dog. So he's like short and stubby and really long, and we got him from the Bahamas, and his name is Rocky. And then I have an American Eskimo, and his name is Benji, and he is my little Velcro dog. He is on my TikToks with me. He's in some YouTubes with me. He's just my best friend, my buddy. He's with me all the time.
Oh,
So, yeah.
well, the Dash and Corgi whatever mix sounds freaking adorable. I can't be.
he is. He's got like that hound dog face, so those like floppy ears. And he's just an absolute cuddle bug. Like if you are sitting, he thinks he should be on your lap, even though again, he's a bigger dog. He's just got short little legs. So
Right.
he has no respect for personal boundaries whatsoever. And he's just in your face wanting your body heat, I think is really what it is.
I love it. All right. So you currently have it's currently a duology out with the same characters in the same world. The first book is called Catalyst. So can you give an overview of that story? One more time.
So Catalyst and Ignite are part of what we are calling the Heart of the Inferno series. And it will ultimately be a 4-book quadrology. I hope that's a word. But there'll be 4 books total in the series. And the story involves our 2 characters. So it's from 2 point of views, Natalie Tyler and Jackson Pace. Natalie Tyler is your average, everyday, rock star female. She is a critical care nurse. And she visits Chicago for her cousin's wedding. And she comes from a very connected family. Like normally her family is very close knit, like there's lots of cousins. But unfortunately she has kind of been estranged from that family because she and her ex-fiance split after she caught him cheating. But because they had grown up together and, just had this long-term relationship, he's still very connected to the family. So it's kind of sad because she's coming to Chicago for her cousin's wedding and he's the best man. And her whole family is still more connected to him than they are to her because they don't really know what happened. And so she's just there like, I'm going to be here for my cousin and I'm going to get through this week. And that's all I want. And then I'm going to go back to Miami. And what she doesn't know is that by coming to Chicago, she's kind of stumbled into this world of Jackson Pace. Now, Jackson Pace is our resident favorite son of Chicago. He's a billionaire. He's a playboy. He's a hotelier. So he owns these luxury hotels, one of which she just happens to be staying at. And at night, he moonlights as the Don Supreme of the underground mafias. So he's a busy boy. He's also a single dad. And so him and Natalie kind of meet because she thwarts inadvertently is just in a position to stop a kidnapping of Jackson's daughter, who is 6. And so in that process, Jackson meets her and, being the guy that he is, who is just constantly very suspicious, he immediately thinks that, she's after something. He doesn't trust her. And so he's kind of a jerk in their first meeting. And she just thinks, he's pompous, spoiled, rich boy. But in the process, they just kind of have this connection and Jackson tries to apologize. She turns him down. It's really funny. But they form this connection where neither one of them can really explain what's brought them together because they're just totally different personalities, but they are like 2 magnets just being constantly drawn to each other. And, they both grow in the process. And, because she's now involved in Jackson's world, Jackson has enemies and they now see her as this target that they could, go after and get to him. So Catalyst is kind of that first part of the story. Ignite is the continuation of the story. And really where things start to heat up for them as a couple. There's a lot that goes on in Ignite. And it's kind of this old traditional love story where, I know that mafia romance can tend to have a little bit darker themes when it comes to romance where, kidnapping or forced marriage or things like that. I didn't really want to do those things. I wanted to show what it would be like if just two people from two completely different walks of life, like kind of fell for each other and how their worlds would collide in the process. So it's this traditional, beautiful love story with, that spicy mafia twist to it. So it's really exciting, and it kind of walks both lines of both genres. And for me, it's really exciting because I know where it's going. Ultimately, like, we will have these 4 books, part of the Heart of the Inferno series, but there's ultimately going to be 14 books total, with different characters that we meet in Heart of the Inferno. They will have, the point of view in other books. So it's like we're going to get this whole little mafia verse that we're creating, and get to see our favorite characters from, different perspectives.
All right. Thank you for that. I'm not often disappointed that this is a PG family friendly podcast, but there's Natalie calls Jackson a billionaire playboy, word that I can't use. But it's hilarious. And I was trying to think of a euphemism, but I don't know. It rhymes with.
I know. Yep, I know.
And it's not even that bad of a word, but it makes me laugh that she's like, well, you're kind of a jerk.
It's funny because I think initially, like, he calls himself that, like, when he's describing himself to her, like, ultimately after he does manage to apologize to her, because she doesn't make it easy for him. And after he does manage to apologize to her, he kind of saves her from some uncomfortable encounter with, like, her mom and her ex-fiance. Because again, her family has no idea that the ex-fiance is the ex-fiance because he cheated. So they're like, they don't understand why she left him. And, this would have been so perfect. The family was already perfect. Why did you do this? And so they're kind of pushing her at him, and she's uncomfortable. And Jackson, just kind of being always around in his own hotel, notices this and kind of saves her and is like, yeah, like, no, we have plans tonight. We're going for dinner. And she's like, we are? He's like, yeah, remember, we're going for dinner. And so he gets her to go to dinner with him. And at that first dinner, he does kind of like surprisingly take his guard down with her and just describes himself as that phrase. And so that becomes a joke between them throughout the entire series, as she teases him like, oh, you're that, billionaire playboy. And then that word. Yeah. And it becomes a term of endearment for him. But yeah, it's really sweet. I've had a few people that have read it that I've had people that enjoy, like, the darker side of mafia romance. And I will say, like, I personally did not read any mafia romance before I wrote my series, because I knew myself well enough to know that if I did, it would kind of change the tone and the story that I wanted to tell. So I kept my version, and in my head, I thought it was, like, really dark and, like, really, like, graphic. And then when I read, like, just excerpts of other books that were mafia romance, I was like, oh my gosh, mine is PG by comparison. But I kind of, like, I've had people who like that darker stuff that said, I was surprised that I liked this, but it was like that sweet, like, romance. Like, Jackson really just woos her, and he may be a jerk to everyone else, but with her, like, from the very beginning, aside from that first meeting where he was just a jerk to her, he treats her like a goddess. Like, no one touches her. Like, he can be a jerk with everyone else, but with her, she is his weakness. Like, that's his princess. Like, that's who he is. And they were surprised that they would like something so sweet when they're used to, like, that darker stuff. And then I've had people who would never have touched mafia romance because of the reputation that it has, that were like, I want to read more mafia romance now. So it's been a really cool line, to walk between, like, that traditional old school romance mixed with, a questionable, morally gray, dark, shadowy, handsome man. So no, there's so many good things in there. Like, he's Greek, and his term for her is, he calls her agapimenos, which is sweetheart in Greek. And so that, like, I had fans that were like, can we put that on a t-shirt, please?
Merch.
Right. So yeah, no, it's been really fun, and I love the story. Like they live in my head constantly, and I've woken up in the middle of the night and had to like write down a scene because I dreamt just certain scenes from the book, and I was like, that's perfect. So yeah, they're constantly in my head and yelling at me.
We're going to go ahead and take our first break of the podcast. But man, characters are just rude. They're mean, they're pushy, they do their own thing, they yell at the authors. But then again, I'm always talking to authors who are mean to their characters. So I think it's a two-way street. The authors are like, no, we're going to put you in these horrible situations. The characters are like, no, you know what? I want something better, different to happen. It's very complicated. We're going to take that first break. When we come back, we'll talk more about the Heart of the Inferno series, of course. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with author Nicole Fanning, about her Heart of the Inferno series. And we've been talking about Catalyst, which is out. The second book of the series is also out. It is called Inferno. Before we get back to the interview, let's go ahead. I'll read you the description again from Amazon of Ignite. 4 weeks ago, Jackson Pace, the billionaire Don Supreme of Chicago's underground mafia syndicates, took a bullet. This bullet was meant for the woman who stole his heart, the beautiful Natalie Tyler. Overwhelmed by the horrors she witnessed in Chicago, Natalie chose to return home to Miami, leaving the broken and broken-hearted Jackson Pace to recover on his own. A month after her visit, Natalie's heart still belongs to Jackson, and you better believe the Don Supreme is coming to collect his woman. But Natalie has a surprise for him. She is pregnant. However, his enemies will give the happy couple no reprieve, especially Jackson's presumed dead ex-girlfriend Rachel and her psychotic brother Michael. They are the leaders of Chicago's newest mafia clan, the Two-Headed Dragon. The Two-Headed Dragon has one goal: the complete destruction of the Pace family mafia. If successful, they will destroy the mafia hierarchy that has guided Chicago's underworld for a century, sending the city into complete chaos. Will Natalie and Jackson's love be enough to defeat the dangers of the present and the demons of the past? So there you go. And I know that there were a few spoilers, of course, there, but Nicole actually mentions several of those within the interview, so I'm not giving away too much. And of course, you can always read that same description online. So or on Amazon or on the back of the book if you're in a physical bookstore, etc. So I'm not really giving too much away if you have access to the books. All right, let's go ahead and return to the interview with Nicole.
And it's interesting. I am not a reader who reads a lot of mafia romance, and so what you do with because there are violent aspects of the story,
yes,
the kind of the conclusion at the end, there's a little more violence, kind of like an action movie, but you don't like just go into great detail. I can't quite imagine. That was a great level of violence for me. So I'm trying to think, I don't want to read the more, that describes every shot and every result of that shot and, those sorts of things.
Again, and like when I wrote it, I immediately thought like, this is so like, to me, I'm like, if it's on a scale of 1 to 10, I thought that my like both the graphic intimacy as well as like the violence level, I'm thinking both of those are at a 10. And realistically, I think there's like 3 chapters in a 45 chapter book that have some violence to them in my book. So there's, those 3 chapters and I'm thinking, oh gosh, like it's a 10. And then when I hear from other people, they're like, oh no, like yours was good, honey. It was like they were telling me that I had made like cookies and cream kind of mafia romance. And I'm like, I don't know if I should have. I'm glad that I didn't read anybody else's mafia romance, because it probably would have affected both of those aspects. And Catalyst, again, is like that first story. So there isn't a whole lot of graphic intimacy in the book. But Ignite, that definitely it's a little bit like more PG-13 R-rated, just for like that aspect. But again, we have a couple that's now established, and they're at one point they are engaged, so there's a little bit more going on there, and yeah, but it's tough to write those scenes. There was one scene that was really tough for me, and I talk about this like it's something that is important in Ignite. In the second book, she's pregnant in the beginning, and unfortunately she's not at the end, and something happens that causes that, like, and it's like really sad because it's a something that happens, and it's a really touching moment, because what I wanted to highlight on that was that is such a difficult thing for not only the woman to go through, but also them as a couple. And the man is also dealing with that too. Like, he was very excited to be a dad and to, be that with her. And so that chapter, I know for a lot of my readers, like they reached out to me and were like, you broke me with this chapter. And then the subsequent couple of chapters that happened after that, where we show the grieving process, those chapters are very personal to me because it's something that I've gone through. And those chapters, like when I say that I cried while I wrote them, I was like ugly crying while I wrote them. But I definitely thought that, one, it's something that we should talk about in our literature if we can, and if it fits with the story, not for the sake of drama fodder, but because it's something that it does happen to 1 in 4 women. So it just was like this opportunity to really tell a story and really showcase like their love for each other being like so much deeper than like that passionate, like, I love you honeymoon phase. But yeah, some of those chapters were really tough to write, including like the violent ones, or, the emotional ones. Like I have cried and laughed and giggled, and swooned over it myself, but some of them were harder than others.
Sure. So why a mafia romance as opposed to, just a contemporary romance? What draws you to that genre?
I think there's just a fun story to tell. Like everybody asks me if I've watched The Godfather. I have watched part of The Godfather. But what I liked was I kind of got into like some Peaky Blinders, some of your old school, like Gangs in New York, like those stories. And I was just always fascinated by these organizations that are all over the world. We always think like mafia and immediately our brains go to like Italian mafia, but that is just really a drop in a bucket compared to all the different organizations all over the world. Like you have the cartels and your triads, and you have other, these mysterious shadowy organizations, but they have their own hierarchies and they have their own honor systems and loyalty systems, and it always gets shown as, that they're just bad men and that, they have no morals. And I think to hope with my story, what I wanted to show was the other piece of that, is that with these mafias, they're intrinsically loyalty, honor, family oriented. It's just those loyalties are not to the government, they're to their family, their mafia family. And so kind of as Jackson explains it to Natalie in Catalyst, is, he sees it as like they have a working relationship with the government. The government has like our police systems, our rehabs, our organizations that, uphold peace and stability. And in order to fund those things, you have to have people committing crimes, and they have to be, going to rehabs and doing those things. And so the mafia really just is there in my book as a way for people to make their own choices. Regardless of what those choices are, they just provide the things that the government doesn't allow them to provide. So they're just like a sense of freedom. And so like to them, it's like, yes, we do what we do, but we're a necessary service. And Jackson kind of like describes it as an ecosystem. You have to have predator and prey. And so he has a working relationship with the government where, he keeps a certain level of crime and he keeps things like calm and secure. And therefore he's allowed to sometimes, even in the case of justice, give justice to those who would normally not give justice in like a vigilante manner. So I hope that it's not like glorifying being bad, but it's just telling a different story, like from their perspective. So they do have to like kind of stay off the radar and make sure that things don't get too noisy, kind of as Jackson describes it. But they, again, they do some good things. And in Jackson's own words, he says, I'm in power to keep worse men out of power. So hopefully that's a good.
How then do you go about researching this type of story without ending up on numerous FBI watch lists?
I actually made a TikTok where I was saying, yep, I'm probably on multiple FBI watch lists. And hello, FBI agent, if you are watching this, I am not a member of any of these organizations. I just write mafia romance. But I try to do my research a lot. You get some firsthand accounts and you're not always like, okay, I don't know if this is totally true. So what can we tell that like would reasonably be true? And again, like you want your reader to be able to wrap your head around, how do we love Jackson Pace? How do we love, like, my readers have fallen in love with Jackson has an alpha squad. They're his 5 top generals that like, handle all of his business. How do we love these men when they do these bad things? And again, so it was just a matter of researching different organizations and how they did things and how these firsthand accounts and people who had gotten out of it kind of said like, this is how they did things. So I just tried to learn as much as I could and hopefully craft a story that just tells a different perspective.
And in terms of characters, you say you've woken up after having dreams about Jackson and Natalie and maybe some of the other characters. What kinds of character development do you like to do? Do you like to do a lot beforehand? Do you have some authors, choose like a certain celebrity that they have in mind, or there's fan art? I mean, how much detail does your character development involve?
So again, like to me, it's just kind of like who I see in my head. I definitely try to be as inclusive as possible because again, like I imagine that if Jackson is selecting the best of the best, they're going to come from different walks of life. They're going to come from different ethnic backgrounds and things like that too. And we want to, again, showcase these are men of the world. And the world is colorful. So they, in my head, like they have a certain look, but I'm very careful when I describe them like in my books, because I'm sure you know this too. As a reader, sometimes that escapism is so important to us, and being able to envision a character how we want to can be really difficult when the author goes into like tons of detail as to like what that character looks like. So I give like enough to be dangerous, where like I've described a little bit about their build and maybe hair color, but very rarely do I really describe like skin color or like ethnicity or things like that, because I want my readers to be able to envision their Jackson or their Josiah or Ethan, however they want. But it's their personalities that I put the most effort into. So before I wrote a word of Heart of the Inferno, I sat down and I wrote 122 pages of character backstory on all of the characters, good or bad, minor or big, that will be in the story, and their personalities and their backstories, so that they have those personalities, so that when I'm writing even a one-liner from one of Jackson's Alpha Squad, it's said in a way that is indicative to that character. But there's so much backstory that I wrote on some of these characters that's what kind of spawned like, oh, like maybe we could do a couple of prequels, or a 5-part Alpha Squad series that's just on the men and their backstories and their kind of proclivities. But yeah, I try to be very careful when painting exact pictures for my readers, because I want them to have that ability to escape and imagine however they want. And really just want them to have a clear picture of what that character's personality is like. So when they say something funny, like they can really hear that character saying it, kind of thing.
Let's go ahead and take our second break of the podcast, but let me pause really quickly to say that is some impressive backstory writing, a lot of information. Just impressive. Everyone's style is different, but I really appreciate the effort that goes into knowing the backstories of so many characters. Again, when we come back, we'll be talking more about the series, of course. We'll be talking about the arc of the series, what Nicole has planned for those other books that are coming within the series. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with author Nicole Fanning. Let's get back to that interview.
You said you've got 4 planned for Jackson and Natalie, and then you've got 14 planned in theory overall with other characters. Is that pretty set in stone, or do you think that could change in terms of, do you have like an overall arc that you want the story to go through, or is it just sort of getting those stories out there? How does that work for you?
Yeah. So part of that, like 122 pages of backstory is like, I wrote the entire plot for the whole series. And so ultimately these 4 books that are in Heart of the Inferno, and all of the Mafia verse with the total 14 books will be something Inferno related. So this is Heart of the Inferno because these 4 books will be the canon. This is where we've built the world, we've introduced the characters, so they will be canon. But the entire plot for the 14 books, whether like for example, I have 2 prequels planned, and then after the Heart of the Inferno, there's some fun changes that happen in there. And so there's one more book planned like on that timeline, like directly after book 4 will close. And so I wrote that whole thing. And then for the other books that are there, those are going to be novellas and like first person accounts, like with the Alpha Squad and other characters. So we've written the whole plot. We know exactly where it's going to want to go. Some of our characters just have incredible arcs planned for them. Because I was always a fan of my writers that could do that, right? Where you took a character and over the course of, like Game of Thrones, and you have 8 series, like you see like the Hound kind of change and morph in his opinions. So there's characters like that in my series that will have those big arcs and those changes, and we'll get to see them. And, a lot of growth for our characters, especially with Jackson and, letting his guard down and being vulnerable and, being a husband and a father and all the things that he's going to be. It's a really interesting storyline there. So, but yes, as far as where we're taking it, yes, clear start, clear end. I'm too much of an OCD person to like, I'll let my characters speak to me, but I keep them in the same room. They don't get to go off and decide anything too crazy. But What's that? Do they surprise you, or do they do things that you're not expecting, or do you kind of keep that to a minimum? Definitely. There's been a couple. So I have said that like what I do is for each book, I create a plot skeleton. So I will sit down and I will map out, because the way my books are set up is that the odd number chapters are Natalie and the even number chapters are Jackson. So every other chapter we're switching perspective. And that way, like, the reader knows what to expect. Okay, Jackson's just finished. Now we're going to where Natalie is. And it kind of moves the story along. So I sit down and I write, okay, I want this book to have between 40 and 45 chapters. What's going to happen? Well, this is going to happen chapter 1. This is going to happen chapter 2. And like, so I have a vague outline of what I want to have happen in that chapter, but I definitely have had things that come up that are like, ooh, like this character would do this, and that would be really cool. So maybe we just switch this around a little bit. So yes, there is some flexibility there, and my characters have certainly surprised me. And sometimes those surprise chapters are some of my favorites. Like, there were ones I never saw coming or ones I didn't plan. And they're some of my favorites. So they can surprise me, but as far as where we're taking them, like we had a pretty set arc there. So the plot skeleton.
And how about Jackson's daughter, Jessica? Do you plan on ever getting to that point in the future where there might be a book more from her perspective?
I have definitely left that door open. So we will have 4 books in the series that will cover about a year, 2 years of time. And then we'll have one more book that will be after the fact, from a different perspective. So a character we've fallen in love with, it'll be his perspective. And then after that, we're going to work on the other books of the series, but I could definitely see myself coming back later on and maybe writing, something for Jessica and kind of what's going on with her. But because I have left, Catalyst and Ignite and on various degrees of cliffhangers, I have ensured my fans that at the end of Heart of the Inferno, so on the 4th book, there will be a happily ever after for our main characters. So, because after the second one, which wasn't really as bad as the first one, as far as cliffhangers go, they were just like, you're going to do this to us every book, aren't you? And I was like, I promise I'm not. I promise I'll give you your happily ever after in the 4th one. I promise.
Just hang in there.
Right.
Do you include autobiographical elements within your writing? I mean, I'm assuming, and I probably shouldn't assume that your husband is not part of the mafia, but I'm in your life.
I've been asked that a lot. And I really am like, that's to me a compliment, because it just means that like people can see like the immense amount of research that was done. But he does get that question a lot. Like, are you in the mafia? Like, but yes, there definitely is some little scenes in there that have come from real life, and even some special moments. Like, I have a Discord that my fans created, where, we just kind of share thoughts and geek out over the books. And in there, I had shared with some of my fans personally that there's a line in book 2 where, Jackson and Natalie are kind of talking about like what happens when, we get old, kind of thing. And Jax and Natalie says, well, I'm just telling you now, like, you better let me go first, because I don't want to live without you. And like, you better be a gentleman, kind of thing. And I can't remember it exactly, but the exact line that I had said to my husband is what I put in my books. And it was kind of a way of like immortalizing that special moment between us, where I was like, you better be a gentleman and you better let me go first, because I don't want to live without you, kind of thing. And so that's something that Natalie says to Jackson. And so like, that's like an actual moment that happened in our lives. And so it's like a little special thing that's in there. So there's little Easter eggs in there. I'm an Easter egg author. I love that. Everything that's in the books has a purpose one way or another, whether it's for this book, the next book, or the series. So lots of fun things in there.
How about the dogs? Are you going to have any dogs make an appearance?
So there is a dog. Jackson has 2 German Shepherds, but we don't really, they're just there. They're like more protection dogs that, just exist. But Natalie has a little one-eyed rescue pug. And he's actually a little Easter egg too, because my best friend had a pug when we were roommates. And he was my god dog. Unfortunately, he just passed away a couple weeks ago, and it broke my heart. But now he forever, his little essence lives on in the series. So the dog in the book is named Cyclops, and he is Natalie's little one-eyed rescue pug. And it's kind of funny because when Jackson shows up in Miami to get her back, we'll say, she comes home one night and Jackson's sitting in her house with the one-eyed rescue pug on his lap. And she's like, "You're a bad guard dog, Cyclops, because you didn't even put up any much of a fight. You're just sitting here panting and smiling away."
Well, yeah.
But then obviously little Jessica falls in love with Cyclops, and then they're the best of buddies. So yeah, that's the little dog. Of course.
All right. I think you've done a good job of kind of giving readers an idea of what to expect a little bit in Ignite. So what are you working on right now? Which part of the series are you working on right now?
So I am working on actually books 3 and 4. There was a little bit of a lull between when book 2 came out and when book 3 is coming out. So I'm hoping to have less of a lull between 3 and 4. Originally I had planned for it to be 4, because I'm kind of a dork. And so the reason I picked the names that I picked is that they're the 4 stages of a fire. So if you look at it, you'd have the catalyst, and then you'd have the ignition, and then you'd have flashpoint, which would be like the hottest part of the fire. And then you would have the embers when like the fire's starting to die down, but it still could turn back into a raging inferno, with the right ammunition. So I had originally planned for it to be 4. And then I kind of was like, well, we can make it 3. And so I kind of squished it down. But then as I started writing 3, I was like, you know what? No, there's specifically a couple of characters that are going to go on this character arc journey that I need to push this out. There's too much to try to, it felt like a disservice to my readers to squish it into 3. So happily I got to decide to go back to 4. So it's going to be a 4-part series. And so I'm currently working right now on Flashpoint. It is in editing stages, while also working on a little bit of Embers as well.
All right. Sounds like fun. How do you keep everything straight? Obviously you are pretty organized. You have all the backstory written down, but do you have some people call it a Bible or, an encyclopedia of this world?
Yes. That's my character Bible and the full plot that we worked out. When you are making these complex characters, you have to give them backstory. What did, Jackson has this father figure character named Ethan. What was his story? How long has he been in the mafia? What else did he do before he was in the mafia? And that's where, when I was writing it, I had to go back in his life and kind of map out what his life would have looked like. So there's so much content there, and the world is so big that it has to be written down somewhere. So it's all in my character Bible, as well as the big plot skeleton, the plot spine, I would say. So that's all there too. And it's just a matter of breaking it down and finding where the good stop parts are for a book. So
I don't know why this made me laugh so hard, but plot spine just tickled me.
Plot spine, yeah.
In terms of writing, is it something that you've always wanted to do? How did you come to decide to write for publication?
So I was always a writer. When I was a little kid, I grew up in a neighborhood that didn't have a lot of kids my age, so I had to entertain myself. And we play outside and you come up with these complex worlds anyways, because you're a little kid. But when I got into reading, I couldn't stop reading. I would devour every book I could get my hands on. My parents would put me to bed, put all my books on the shelf, and they'd wake up and I'd be in bed with 4 books and half asleep with my, face planted in a book. And so when I was little, it's kind of embarrassing, but I would actually write my own episodes of TV shows. One of them in particular being The A-Team that went off the air before I was born. But my mom had the entire video collection of The A-Team, and I was obsessed with it. And I would write my own episodes and give them to my mom and be like, hey, can you send this to the producers and make them make my episode? And my mom would be like, yeah, I'll do that, honey. And, file it away somewhere. Because again, the show went off the air before I was even born. But and when I got to middle school, high school, I found a friend who was as interested in writing as I was. And so we would actually spend our whole weekends, we had our own works in progress. And we would each go home, write a whole chapter of our work in progress and have that for each other on Monday to exchange. kind of like we were writing our own little soap operas at the same time. And then like, you know, it just as you get older in life and responsibilities and, you know, I got to go make something of myself. It never really went away. It just was something I never really had time to dedicate to. So when the pandemic happened and I suddenly found myself with an abundance of time and considering learning to knit, I was like, well, maybe I don't learn to knit and maybe I write this story that I've just kind of had in my head forever. So I wrote that down and I just sent it to like my husband and a couple of friends for fun. And they came back and were like, you have to publish this. Like, this is awesome. And I would read more of it. And I was not expecting that. So at that point I was like, okay, well, you know, we'll give it a shot. And thankfully I've been so fortunate with, you know, being on TikTok and, you know, some of the amazing creators on there falling in love with Jackson and Natalie and just promoting that story. They've really made it, you know, what it became. And, you know, obviously with Mickey's help and, you know, having him on my team now too, it's just blowing up, but it was just something I didn't expect. And it's beautiful and exciting. And I know that somewhere deep down, my little child self would be so proud of me for finally doing what I want to do with my life.
Let's go ahead and take our last break of the podcast. When we return, the conclusion of the interview with Nicole Fanning. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts Social Media Podcast. Time to hashtag everything. We talk about all the fun, crazy stories on social media. From Instagram to Facebook, Twitter to Tumblr, or probably even Friendster. Join us each week as we explore the quirky side of social media. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Social Media Podcast.
It's simple, such a sad song. The one that we rely on to get us.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. To put my next statement in context, Nicole, before the break, was talking about her childhood and writing episodes of the A-Team that she wanted her mom to send in so that they could be made into episodes. So just a reminder, because otherwise my next comment may or may not make sense to you.
Yeah, you were a total nerd child, and I love you. I absolutely love Little Nerd.
Yes,
Nicole,
I was
love
a
it.
total nerd child.
I love it. And the fact that you were writing episodes of the A-Team is hilarious. Early fanfic.
Yeah, I was obsessed with Murdoch and Face. They were my favorite. Yeah.
Yes,
and I'm always like a fan of like the grumpy characters, so I really love Josiah. Is in my books. I kind of compare him to like a B.A. Baracus type person.
Nice.
So yeah, my dad, when he read my books, was like, I totally see the influence that the A-Team had on you, because you name them the Alpha Squad and they have, you know, all the same characteristics. It's so funny. I didn't even see it when I was doing it. And I'm like, oh my God, I did. That's totally true. It's totally true.
At any point, is Jackson going to say that he loves when a plan comes together?
I think he says something to that effect. I'm sure. And if he hasn't, I'm sure it will inadvertently slip its way in, just because it would make my dad laugh.
Yes.
To hear him be like, yep, there you are. There it is.
How is it having, this is a little random, but how is it having your dad read romance novels that you've written? Awkward? Fine?
Yeah, it was actually okay. We didn't talk about the inappropriate chapters. We did not discuss them. But he really enjoyed the story. And that was the other thing too, was that, you know, I did kind of warn him. I was like, look, there's 45 chapters in the book. 3 of them probably have some, you know, inappropriate material in them, but the way that I've described it hopefully is a little bit more classy, and like it's nothing that somebody hasn't seen in like any TV show that they like. So you know, he was really just obsessed with the story and was like, this is a great book and I'm so proud of you, and you know, I better get an early copy of the next one. So
Nice. From your experience, do you have advice for aspiring authors?
Yes. First of all, I would say hire a proofreader. Um, I I was like, again, like so OCD that when I first wrote Catalyst, when I first published it, I did not hire a proofreader. I was like, I'll just read it a bunch of times and that'll be good. But what I learned was you can't do that because your writer brain inserts words where they should be because you know how the phrase should go. So sometimes if a word is flipped or if it's missing, you don't see it because in your head it's already there. So with the second book, I had an editor for the second book, and I actually had that editor go back and edit Catalyst as well, because I was like, look, the caliber between Catalyst and Ignite as far as editing was just like night and day. So, once we finished Ignite, then she went back and she also edited Catalyst. And so the Catalyst is updated and beautiful. But hire a proofreader and, you need a team. Those would be my two pieces of advice. A team can be, your friends or your fans that love your work enough to tell you, hey, like there's for example, in the pregnancy aspect in Ignite, I had a fan tell me like, hey, I'm not a mom myself. So she had said like, hey, you have this timeline here that doesn't really match up, because if you match this up, this wouldn't have been happening when she was here. And like little things like that you don't necessarily see. Having that team of people that can read your work, love your work, and want it to be the best it can be is so important. So that's your proofreader, your editor, your ARC readers, as well as, like people like Mickey, who I feel like I'm very fortunate to have like the success that I've had on TikTok and social media. But when it comes to traditional publishing, I have no idea what I'm doing. And no idea really even where to start, or traditional marketing. So having someone like Mickey who does know the lay of the land, and can help navigate those other areas, so important. So my advice to new authors is like, stick to your story, know your story, do your research, get a proofreader, and have your team, ready to not just love your work and fan your ego, but to make it better and be able, have people, yes, that love your work, and they're going to tell you that they love anything you write, even if it was a grocery list. But having people on your team that will tell you like, hey, love this, but like either this, just, I see what you're trying to say, but it's kind of confusing, or, hey, this timeline doesn't match up, or this, this is a tiny little plot hole, whatever the case is, like you need those people in your life. So it takes a village to write a book.
Sure. Do you still fall asleep with multiple books in bed with you? And if so, what do you read?
So in truth, I don't read anything while I'm writing. And since I'm on a deadline for Flashpoint, I'm not reading anything besides rereading Catalyst and Ignite, which I do that to kind of just stay in the world and stay in the mindset of the characters. And unfortunately, the reason I don't read anything else is just because I will sit there and be like, I should be writing. I should be editing. I should be doing something. And like, it just gets to me too much. So I will save that for my tiny little break that I take between books. But right now I'm not reading anything besides like my own work and trying to make it better. And I don't fall asleep with multiple books. I do fall asleep with Catalyst and Ignite in my bed, and my phone usually in my hands, like writing notes or things I need to edit or circling edits that I need to make, like just even still. So it's just, I am either doing an adult task like grocery shopping or laundry or cleaning my house, or I am writing in one way or another, whether it's on my phone or it's in my head or it's on like my voice recorder. Like it's just, that is my life.
I'm backtracking a little bit, but for some reason, when you were talking about the books, it reminded me, I wanted to ask you about the cover art. Did you have a lot of say in the cover art? And often this genre tends to have shirtless men. Yours does not.
Yes.
So can you talk about that decision? I'm cool with it. But
yes. Yes. So I did have say in the cover art. I chose the cover art. I can say that the series is going to get a, what do you call that? A makeover. There will not be shirtless men on my books, because I have a grandmother who I promised that I would not put half naked men on the covers of my books. And I would let the book content and the story speak for itself. And again, also it goes back to that point of like, I don't want to paint that picture too deeply for my reader of what the characters look like. So the first book, Catalyst, has the rose, and that is part of the story. Jackson's family crest and like the crest of his hotel is this white rose. At one point when he's trying to apologize to her, he tries to send her roses and she declines them. And so then he decides to send her a dozen roses every hour on the hour until she accepts his apology. So that happens that she's at a hotel. So she comes out, from a dinner with her favorite cousin and walks back into the hotel, and the entire lobby of the hotel is covered in like these bouquets of white roses. And each bouquet has like a, like not in this exact language, but basically a to Natalie from Jackson, I'm sorry. And she's mortified because she's like, my whole family's staying at this hotel and they don't know you and I barely know you and nobody can know like what is going on. And so she agrees to accept the roses and like have a drink with him. And so when, like certain things happen later on, she has the roses in the hotel, and it just has a really like deep meaning there. But the rose scene is actually one of the scenes that I dreamt in a dream, and I woke up and was like, this is brilliant. And it's one of my favorites because it makes me laugh every time. He's just so stubborn in the sense of like, no, you're going to accept my apology. And just the hilarious levels to which he would go. And then the cover for Ignite is the Sapphires of Troy, which is a story that is told in Catalyst. It's one of Jackson's like backstories and family stories. And they are his family heirlooms that have been passed down in his family for a lot of generations. So they have significance there too. But the series is going to be getting a bit of a makeover coming here soon, but I can promise that they will stay on brand and no shirtless men.
Okay, well, it's your grandmother will be happy about that.
Yes.
Where can people find you? I know you said you've mentioned TikTok, but website and other social media where people can connect with you.
Absolutely. So I am on Kindle and Amazon for like purchasing and reading the books, as well as I have a website, which is N as in the letter N, nherownwords.com. And I'm on TikTok and Facebook and Instagram. So you can find me on all of them. Facebook, author Nicole Fanning, Instagram, author Nicole Fanning, and TikTok, just Nicole Fanning, because I was lucky enough to get my real name on TikTok. So yeah, you can find me on all those places. And on TikTok, I will share some excerpts from the books, some like funny reenactments. So.
All right. Well, Nicole, we've talked about a variety of different things today, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you were hoping to highlight during our time together?
No, this has been fantastic, and honestly, one of my favorite interviews because I got to really talk about the breakdown of how the characters became what they came and what has what plans we are to come. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about both Catalyst and Ignite and kind of a little bit of the rest of the series as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you once again to Nicole for not only taking the time to talk to me about her Heart of the Inferno series, but also for letting me kind of hijack part of her day after we stopped recording, because I had a couple of questions that weren't necessarily relevant to the interview, but that I wanted to ask her about. And I don't even remember how much longer we talked after the recording stopped. So she was very kind and very sweet and indulged me in some of my my other questions. So thank you, Nicole, for that. I really appreciate it. Also, you heard her mention Mickey a couple of times in the episode, and I don't think we explained during the interview who that is. So that is Mickey Mickelson. He is her publicist, and he and I work together. I work with him with a lot of interviews, or authors, that have come on the podcast to do interviews. So we have a great relationship. He is a good guy, and you can tell that Nicole really appreciates their relationship as well. So just an explanation, because I think we threw out the name Mickey a couple of times during the conversation, just in case you were wondering who in the heck we were talking about. So thank you so much to Nicole for talking to me. Thank you, as always, to you, my listeners, for taking some time to spend with me and another author during your day. I hope you'll join me for the next episode. I will be speaking with author Louise Marburg about her new collection of short stories. The book is called No Diving Allowed, and I am looking forward to chatting with her about that collection of short stories. If you're a fan of this podcast, thank you, first of all. Also, if you haven't done so already, if you could take a moment to just give the podcast a review, whether that's starred or written, as always, that helps us to get this podcast and these interviews out to more people who love books just like you. Also, if you're not following the podcast on social media, please do so. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I would love to hear from you. Please go ahead and follow on whatever platforms you prefer, and then, interact. Send me questions, send me comments. Tell me which books you've read. Tell me which books you want to read, which authors you are fans of, especially those that are being interviewed, but also just in general. So please do those things if you have not already done so. Thank you again for taking the time out of your day to listen to this podcast. And I hope that you are having a wonderful day. I hope you have a wonderful week coming up. But as always, I hope that your time involves plenty of space and opportunity to get yourself lost in a good book.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.